May 13, 1945. 24 American soldiers climbed aboard a C-47 transport plane at Hollandia, New Guinea. A sightseeing flight. 3 hours over the mountains to see Shangri-La Valley. A place so remote that the local tribes had never seen white people until a year earlier. The flight was supposed to be safe, routine, a break from the war. The Japanese were retreating, victory was weeks away. Nothing could go wrong. At 3:15 that afternoon, the C-47 slammed into the side of a mountain at full speed. The impact tore the aircraft apart. Fuel ignited instantly. Fire consumed the wreckage. 21 people died in seconds, burned alive, crushed by twisted metal, thrown from the plane into the jungle 200 feet below. 3 survivors crawled from the burning wreckage. Corporal Margaret Hastings, 24 years old, Women's Army Corps, both legs burned. Lieutenant John McCollum, 30 years old, navigator, his twin brother dead in the crash. Sergeant Kenneth Decker, 23, radio operator, arm fractured, face burned. They were stranded in a valley surrounded by 14,000-foot mountains. No radio, no supplies, no way out. The nearest Allied base was 150 miles away. Between them and rescue were mountains, jungle, swamps, and Japanese patrols hunting for stragglers. And they had just crash-landed in territory controlled by the Dani tribe, Stone Age warriors who had killed explorers before. The 3 survivors had days to live, maybe hours. No one had ever been rescued from Shangri-La Valley. The terrain made it impossible, until the army decided to try the most insane extraction ever attempted in World War II. A glider snatch. Never done with passengers, never tried in mountains, never performed behind enemy lines. This is the untold story of Operation Shangri-La. From the moment 24 people boarded a doomed flight for a jungle sightseeing tour, to the 47 days 3 survivors waited in a valley that time forgot. From the paratrooper medics who jumped into Stone Age territory to help strangers, to the glider pilot who had one chance to snatch 5 people off a dirt strip car from jungle. Discover how the Army accomplished a rescue that every expert said was suicide. 3 survivors, 47 days, 1 glider, and an extraction so dangerous that the pilots wrote goodbye letters before attempting it. Hollandia, New Guinea, May 1945. The war in the Pacific was entering its final phase. Germany had just surrendered. Japan was losing everywhere. Allied forces controlled most of New Guinea. The massive Japanese garrison that once threatened Australia was broken, scattered, retreating into the mountains to die. American bases on the New Guinea coast were relatively safe. No more Japanese air raids, no more ground attacks. Soldiers who had survived years of brutal jungle warfare were finally catching their breath. The base at Hollandia had become a major logistics hub. Supplies, hospitals, airfields, tens of thousands of personnel. Not everyone was combat troops. There were nurses, WACs, clerks, mechanics, engineers, people who had been in New Guinea for months or years without seeing anything except the base and their duties. They were bored, exhausted, ready for the war to end. Some of them wanted to see something interesting before going home. Colonel Peter Prosson was the maintenance chief for the Far East Air Service Command. He had access to aircraft. He had been hearing stories about a valley discovered in 1938 by explorer Richard Archbold. A valley so isolated that the people living there had no contact with the outside world. They used stone tools, fought with spears and bows, had never seen metal. Archbold had called it Shangri-La, after the fictional paradise in the novel Lost Horizon. The valley was about 70 miles inland from Hollandia, a 3-hour flight. Easy trip in a C-47 transport. Prosson decided to organize sightseeing tours, give people a break, show them something extraordinary. The flights became popular. Personnel would sign up, fly over the mountains, look down at Shangri-La Valley, see the Dani villages, the terraced gardens, warriors carrying spears, then fly back to base. Safe. Simple. Entertainment. Prosson organized several successful flights. Nothing went wrong. The trips seemed routine. On May 13, he scheduled another flight. 24 people signed up. 9 officers, 9 WACs, 6 enlisted men. They boarded a C-47 nicknamed Gremlin Special. The pilot was Captain Herbert Good. Experienced. Over 1,000 flight hours. He knew the route. Had done it before. Standard procedure was to fly at 10,000 feet, well above the valley floor, high enough to be safe from any terrain. The passengers strapped in. The plane took off at noon. Weather was clear. Perfect conditions. Corporal Margaret Hastings was one of the WACs who boarded that flight. She worked in the base postal office, had been in New Guinea for months, never saw anything except mail sorting and her tent. The chance to see Shangri-La was exciting, a real adventure. She took a window seat. Lieutenant John McCollum sat near the front. He was a navigator. His twin brother Robert was also on the flight. They rarely got to spend time together. The sightseeing trip was a chance to relax. Enjoy the view. Sergeant Kenneth Decker operated radios. This was his break from the war. Just a few hours, then back to work. The C-47 reached the mountains at 3,000 feet. Captain Good descended to give passengers a better view. Standard practice on these sightseeing flights. Get low. Let people see the valley clearly. The Dani villages. The warriors. The Stone Age world existing in 1945. The plane circled. Passengers pressed against windows, taking photographs, pointing, talking. Then Good turned to make another pass, lower this time, give everyone an even better look. At 3:15, the plane hit turbulence. Strong downdrafts common in mountain valleys. Good tried to climb, the engines roared, but the C-47 was too low, too slow. The aircraft descended instead of climbing. Passengers felt the plane dropping. Some screamed. Good fought the controls. The mountain wall rushed toward them. No time to pull up, no time to turn. The left wing struck trees. The impact spun the plane sideways. The fuselage slammed into the mountainside. Metal tore apart. Fuel tanks ruptured. Fire exploded through the cabin. Margaret Hastings remembered the impact. The sound of metal ripping. People screaming. Then fire everywhere. She was thrown against the side of the aircraft. Her legs burning. She couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Smoke filled everything. Someone dragged her toward a hole in the fuselage. She crawled through. Fell out of the burning wreckage. Hit the ground. Rolled down the slope. Stopped against a tree. Behind her, the C-47 was an inferno. Flames 50 feet high. Ammunition cooking off. Explosions. Screaming stopped quickly. John McCullum had been thrown clear during the impact. He was conscious, disoriented. His arm hurt. He stood up, looked back at the crash site. The plane was completely destroyed. Bodies visible through the flames. He started calling names. His brother's name. Robert. No answer. He moved closer to the wreckage. The heat drove him back. No one could survive that fire. He heard someone crying. Found Margaret Hastings 20 yards away. Her legs were badly burned. She was in shock. He helped her move further from the burning plane. They waited, listened. Heard another voice. Kenneth Decker emerged from the jungle. His face was burned, right arm fractured, but he could walk. 3 survivors, 21 dead. The fire burned for hours. The survivors could do nothing except watch, wait, hope someone had seen the crash. Margaret's burns were severe, both legs from ankle to knee. The pain was overwhelming. She tried not to scream, didn't want to attract attention. They had no idea where they were, no idea if there were Japanese nearby, no idea if the local tribes were friendly or hostile. McCollum found a small first aid kit that had been thrown from the plane. Basic supplies, bandages, morphine. Not nearly enough. Night fell. The jungle became pitch black. Strange sounds everywhere. Animal calls. Insects. The survivors huddled together, afraid to move, afraid to light a fire. Japanese patrols might see it. Margaret couldn't sleep. The pain was too intense. McCollum gave her morphine. It helped. A little. They talked quietly, tried to stay positive. Someone would come. The plane was overdue. Search parties would be organized. They just had to survive until rescue arrived. May 14, dawn. The survivors assessed their situation. They were on a mountainside, dense jungle, steep slopes. Margaret couldn't walk. Her legs wouldn't support weight. McCollum and Decker fashioned a stretcher from branches and parachute silk salvaged from the wreckage. They needed to move, find water, find a clearing where rescue planes could see them, get away from the crash site in case Japanese were investigating. They started down the mountain, carrying Margaret. The terrain was brutal, every step painful. Decker's arm was useless. McCollum did most of the carrying. They made perhaps a quarter mile in 6 hours. They found a small stream, fresh water. First good news. McCollum scouted ahead, found a slightly more open area, better visibility for search aircraft. They moved Margaret there, set up a basic camp, used parachute material to mark their location, made it visible from above. Then they waited, listened for aircraft, searched the sky. Nothing. Hours passed. They heard planes in the distance, too far away. The aircraft never came close enough to spot them. Another night. More pain. More morphine. Running low. Margaret's burns were getting infected. Jungle environment. Heat. Humidity. Bacteria everywhere. They needed medical help. Soon. May 15. Still no rescue. Margaret was developing a fever. Infection spreading. She needed antibiotics. Real medical care. McCollum and Decker took turns staying with her and searching for better clearings. The jungle was unforgiving. Every direction looked the same. Dense vegetation, mountains in every direction. No way out on foot, not with a severely wounded person. They would have to be found, extracted. There was no other option. May 16, 3 days since the crash. A search plane finally appeared. Low enough to see. McCollum waved parachute material, shouted even though the pilot couldn't possibly hear. The plane circled, waggled its wings. They had been spotted. Relief washed over the survivors. Now someone knew they were alive. Rescue would come. They just had to wait. Stay alive. Keep Margaret's infections from killing her. The plane dropped a canister. Supplies. Food. Water purification tablets. More medical supplies. A note. Help is coming. Stay where you are. The survivors ate real food for the first time in 3 days. Read the note over and over. Help is coming. But how? The valley was surrounded by mountains. No airstrip. No place to land even a small plane. The jungle was too thick for helicopters. Not that the army had many helicopters in New Guinea anyway. How would rescue come? Hollandia Base, May 16. Colonel Ray Elsmore faced an impossible problem. 3 survivors trapped in Shangri-La Valley, 150 miles from the nearest base, surrounded by mountains too high for safe flying, terrain too rough for landing, and Japanese forces still operating in the area. Standard rescue procedures wouldn't work. He needed something radical, something insane. He contacted Major William McKee, engineer officer, expert in unconventional operations. McKee listened to the situation, looked at maps, calculated distances, then suggested something that made everyone in the room think he was crazy. Parachute in a rescue team, then extract everyone using a glider snatch. The room went silent. Glider snatches were experimental. The Army had been testing the technique for less than a year. The concept was simple in theory, impossibly dangerous in practice. A person on the ground would be attached to a tow line stretched between 2 poles. An aircraft would fly low, catch the line with a hook. The person would be yanked into the air, pulled behind the plane at high speed, hauled up to the aircraft. The technique worked. Sometimes. With cargo. With test dummies. Never with actual passengers in combat conditions. Never in mountains. Never behind enemy lines. Elsmore listened to the plan, weighed the alternatives. There were no alternatives. The survivors couldn't walk out. Aircraft couldn't land. Helicopters didn't have the range or altitude capability. The glider snatch was suicide, but it was the only option. He approved the mission. Operation Shangri-La began. Phase 1. Drop paratrooper medics into the valley. Keep the survivors alive. Build a makeshift airstrip. Phase 2. Extract everyone using a glider snatch that had never been attempted with human passengers outside of controlled tests. Simple. Suicidal. The only chance they had. Lieutenant Walter Herndon volunteered to lead the rescue team. He was a paratrooper medic with the 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, 24 years old, Georgia. He had made dozens of combat jumps, survived the New Guinea campaign. This would be his most dangerous mission yet. Not because of enemy action, because of terrain. The jump zone was jungle, trees, uneven ground, high altitude. Standard military parachutes required 500 feet minimum altitude for safe deployment. The valley was surrounded by mountains reaching 14,000 feet. Winds were unpredictable, landing zones uncertain. Herndon knew the risks. He volunteered anyway. Sergeant Benjamin Bulatow joined the team. Filipino-American medic, combat veteran, skilled in jungle survival. He and Herndon gathered supplies, medical equipment, morphine, antibiotics, surgical tools, food, water purification, machetes. Everything they would need to keep 3 wounded survivors alive for days or weeks until extraction could be organized. They packed it all into drop containers, 200 pounds of equipment. Then, they boarded a C-47. May 19th, 6 days after the crash. Time to jump into Shangri-La. The flight took 3 hours. Herndon and Bulatow checked their parachutes, reviewed the plan. The drop zone was a clearing about 2 miles from where the survivors were located. Best option available. Still surrounded by trees. Still dangerous. The C-47 circled the valley. The crew spotted the clearing, lined up the approach. Herndon stood in the door, looked down. Jungle stretched in every direction. Mountains towered above. He had jumped into hostile territory before. This felt different, more isolated, more final. If something went wrong, no one could help them. The light turned green. He jumped. The parachute deployed. Herndon descended fast. Jungle rushed up. He tried to steer away from trees. Impossible. The canopy was too thick. He crashed through branches. The parachute snagged. He hung suspended 20 feet above the ground, harness cutting into his chest. He hit the quick release. Fell. Hit the ground hard. Pain shot through his ankle. Sprained, not broken. He could walk. Bulatow landed nearby, also caught in trees, also fell. Bruised but functional. They gathered their equipment. The drop containers had scattered. Some hung in trees. Some hit the ground. They collected what they could find, started moving toward the survivors. Navigation was guesswork. Dense jungle. No clear paths. They used compass bearings, hacked through undergrowth with machetes. Progress was measured in yards per hour. They heard voices, not English, native language, the Dani. Herndon and Bulatow froze, listened. Footsteps approaching. They had no idea if the tribes were hostile. Mission briefings said the Dani had killed explorers before, treated outsiders as threats or curiosities. The footsteps got closer. Then Dani warriors stepped into view, 6 men, carrying spears, wearing traditional dress. Seeing white men for perhaps the 2nd or 3rd time in their lives, the warriors stopped, stared. Herndon raised his hands, showed he had no weapons drawn, smiled, tried to look non-threatening. The Dani warriors conferred among themselves. Then one stepped forward, gestured, clearly offering to guide them. Herndon and Bulatow followed. The Donnie led them through the jungle with practiced ease. Paths invisible to outsiders were highways to the locals. 2 hours later, they arrived at the survivors' location. The Donnie had been visiting the survivors daily, bringing food, curious, friendly, fascinated by these strange, injured people who had fallen from the sky. Margaret Hastings saw Herndon and Bulatow approaching, started crying. Relief. After 7 days, medical help had finally arrived. Real trained medics, not just McCollum doing his best with a basic first aid kit. Herndon examined her burns immediately. They were infected, badly. Fever, delirium. Another few days and sepsis would kill her. He administered penicillin, the new miracle drug. Not widely available yet. He had brought enough for the mission, bandaged her legs properly, gave her morphine for pain. Then examined McCollum and Decker. Their injuries were less severe, but still needed attention. Decker's arm required a proper splint. McCollum had burns and cuts that needed cleaning and bandaging. Herndon delivered the news. Rescue was coming, but it would take time. They needed to build an airstrip, 500 feet long, 30 feet wide, flat ground, in jungle, with hand tools. Then a glider would snatch them out. The survivors didn't understand at first. A glider? No engine? How would that work? Herndon explained the technique. A tow line, a hook. A C-47 would yank the glider into the air, with passengers inside. It had never been done before with people, only cargo and test dummies. The survivors processed this information. That was the rescue plan, a technique that had never been used in combat. That sounded absolutely insane. Margaret asked the obvious question. What were the chances it would work? Herndon was honest. He didn't know, but it was their only option. The Donnie were fascinated by the newcomers. They brought food, sweet potatoes, fruit, small animals. They watched the medics work with intense curiosity. Some of them had never seen metal before. Herndon's medical tools were magical objects. The parachutes were valuable fabric unlike anything in the valley. The relationship between rescuers and natives became cooperative. The Donnie helped clear ground, carried supplies, guided the Americans through terrain they knew intimately. Without the Donnie, the rescue would have been impossible. They made everything easier. May 20th. Herndon surveyed possible locations for an airstrip. The valley floor was relatively flat in some areas, but covered in vegetation. Kunai grass 8 feet tall. Trees, rocks. Getting 500 feet of clear flat ground would require cutting down everything, moving boulders, leveling the surface. He had 2 men, survivors who could barely walk, and friendly locals with stone tools. This would take weeks. Time Margaret might not have, despite the antibiotics. He radioed the base, requested more personnel, more tools, more everything. Colonel Elsmore responded by dropping more supplies, axes, saws, shovels, explosives for removing stubborn trees and rocks. Then he authorized dropping more paratroopers, engineers, soldiers. 15 more men jumped into Shangri-La Valley over the next week. Each jump was dangerous. Each landing risked injury. Several men were hurt, broken bones, sprains. Everyone landed in trees or rough ground, but they all survived. By May 26th, Herndon had 17 men, enough to build an airstrip. Maybe. The work was brutal. Kunai grass had roots like steel cable. Trees had to be cut by hand, stumps removed, rocks dug up and rolled away. The ground leveled with shovels and muscle. Temperature in the valley reached 90 degrees during the day. Humidity made breathing difficult. Everyone worked shirtless, sunburned, dehydrated, drinking stream water purified with tablets, eating sea rations supplemented by food the Danny brought. Progress was measured in feet per day. The Danny helped. Dozens of warriors joined the work. They had never seen construction on this scale, never imagined cutting a path through jungle for flying machines. They worked enthusiastically, fascinated by the purpose. Margaret's condition slowly improved. The antibiotics were working. Fever subsided. Infections began healing. She could sit up, talk, stay conscious for longer periods, but she still couldn't walk. Her legs wouldn't support weight. She would have to be carried to the glider when extraction finally happened. If extraction happened. She watched the men work, saw how slowly the airstrip progressed, began to wonder if this would ever be finished, if the glider snatch would ever be attempted, if she would die in Shangri-La waiting for a rescue that never came. McCollum and Decker helped where they could. Light work, clearing small debris, organizing supplies. They were stronger than Margaret, but still injured. Decker's arm was healing. McCollum had taken on a leadership role among the survivors, keeping spirits up, helping Herndon coordinate, making sure everyone stayed positive. The psychological pressure was intense. Being trapped for weeks, watching an airstrip slowly take shape, knowing the extraction method had never been proven, wondering if the glider would work, or if they would die trying. June 5th, 3 weeks since the crash. The airstrip was 70% complete. 350 feet cleared, another 150 to go, then smoothing, compacting, making it solid enough for a glider to land and take off. Herndon estimated another week, maybe 10 days. Elsmore radioed with news. The glider was ready, pilot selected, equipment prepared. As soon as the strip was finished, they would attempt the snatch. Be ready. Time was running out. The monsoon season was approaching. Weather would make flying impossible. Winds would make the glider snatch suicidal. They had a narrow window. Days. Maybe a week. The workers doubled their efforts. Men worked until they collapsed, rested, worked again. The Donnie matched their intensity, sensing urgency, understanding that time mattered. The airstrip grew. 400 feet, 450, 500. June 10th. The strip was finished. Not perfect, not smooth, but flat. Clear. 500 feet long, 30 feet wide. Enough for a glider. Maybe. If the pilot was skilled. If the weather cooperated. If the glider snatch actually worked. Herndon radioed Hollandia. Airstrip complete. Ready for extraction. Elsmore acknowledged. The glider would come tomorrow. June 11th. 1 month since the crash. The rescue team prepared the survivors. Explained the procedure again.
Margaret would be strapped into a special harness, connected to a tow line stretched between 2 poles. A C-47 would fly low, catch the line with a hook mounted beneath the fuselage. She would be yanked off the ground, accelerated to 80 miles per hour in seconds, pulled into the air, towed behind the plane, then hauled up through a hatch. Simple, terrifying, the only way out.
June 11th, 1945. Dawn broke over Shangri-La Valley. The rescue team prepared the extraction site. 2 15-foot poles buried 6 feet deep. A nylon tow line stretched between them. 300 feet long, strong enough to lift a person. Theoretically. The technique had been tested at Wright Field in Ohio. Test dummies survived. A few volunteers had tried it and lived, but never in combat conditions. Never in mountains. Never with someone as badly injured as Margaret Hastings. This would be the first operational glider snatch with human passengers in military history. And if it failed, the person being snatched would likely die, neck broken by acceleration, or dropped from 500 feet when the line snapped, or dragged through trees if the hook missed. Captain William Samuels was the glider pilot chosen for the mission. 26 years old, Michigan. He had flown dozens of combat glider missions in Europe and the Pacific, landed gliders under fire, survived crashes. This was different, more dangerous than anything he had done. He would have to land a glider on a 500-foot dirt strip carved from jungle, surrounded by mountains, with unpredictable winds. Then take off. Again. With passengers. Using a snatch technique that was barely proven. He wrote letters to his family before the mission, just in case. So did his co-pilot. So did the C-47 crew who would perform the snatch. Everyone understood this was suicide territory. The plan was to extract the 3 survivors first. Margaret, then McCollum, then Decker. 3 separate snatches. 3 opportunities for something to go catastrophically wrong. Then they would bring out the paratroopers, Herndon and his team. Multiple trips, multiple landings, multiple takeoffs, each one as dangerous as the last. Some of the rescue team would walk out, hike through the mountains to the coast. Volunteers, men who preferred taking their chances with the jungle rather than the glider. Herndon understood. He wasn't ordering anyone into that death trap who didn't want to go. At 0900 hours, the C-47 appeared, circling the valley. The glider was towed behind it, Samuels in the cockpit. He released from the tow line at 5,000 feet, descended in a tight spiral, fighting wind. The glider was unpowered. One chance to land. If he overshot the strip, there was no going around. If he undershot, they would crash into trees. He lined up the approach, descended steeply. The strip rushed up. Too fast! He pulled back. The glider flared. Wheels touched dirt, bounced, touched again, rolled, slowed, stopped with 50 feet of runway remaining. Perfect landing. The rescue team rushed forward, secured the glider, checked for damage. None. Samuels climbed out, looked at the strip, looked at the mountains, shook his head. They expected him to take off from here, with passengers, using a snatch. This was insane. Margaret Hastings was carried to the extraction point. The harness was fitted carefully, padded to protect her burned legs. She was terrified, trying not to show it. Herndon explained again what would happen. The C-47 would fly over, catch the tow line. She would feel a massive jerk, acceleration, then be pulled into the air, flying behind the plane. The crew would winch her up, pull her inside. It would take about 10 minutes. It would be uncomfortable, possibly painful, but she would survive. Probably. Margaret nodded. What choice did she have? This or die in the valley? The C-47 made its approach. Low, 80 miles per hour. The hook extended beneath the fuselage, aimed at the tow line stretched between the poles. The pilot had one chance. If he missed, they would have to circle, try again, waste fuel, risk everything on multiple attempts. He didn't miss. The hook caught the line perfectly. The tow line snapped tight. Margaret felt the jerk, like being hit by a truck. The acceleration was violent, 0 to 80 in 2 seconds. She was yanked off the ground, pulled horizontal, flying. The ground dropped away. She was airborne, being towed behind a C-47 at 500 feet, over jungle, mountains. This was the most terrifying experience of her life, and she had survived a plane crash and a month in Shangri-La. Inside the C-47, the crew worked fast. They had practiced this, but never with a real person, never in combat. The winch operator started pulling the line in, hand over hand. Margaret rose toward the aircraft. The wind buffeted her. The harness cut into her shoulders and chest. Her burned legs screamed in pain, but she was alive, rising, getting closer to the plane. The crew reached out, grabbed her harness, pulled her through the hatch. She was inside, safe. She collapsed, crying, laughing, relieved. The first human ever successfully extracted by glider snatch in combat. She had made history. She just wanted to go home. The C-47 circled, dropped the tow line. Crew on the ground reset the poles, attached a new line. McCollum was next. He watched Margaret's extraction, saw how violent it was, how dangerous. His turn. He strapped into the harness, waited. The C-47 made its approach. Hook caught the line. McCollum was yanked into the air. The acceleration knocked the wind from his lungs. He flew behind the plane, was winched up, pulled inside. 2 successful snatches, 1 more survivor. Then the rescue team. Decker was last. His fractured arm made the harness uncomfortable, but he endured. The C-47 approached. 3rd time. Hook caught the line. Decker was pulled into the air, winched up, extracted successfully. All 3 survivors were out, safe, flying back to Hollandia. A month after the crash, they were finally rescued. The impossible had worked.
The insane plan had succeeded. Now came the hard part, getting the rest of the team out. Over the next 3 days, the glider made multiple trips, landing, loading 2 men, taking off using the snatch technique. Each landing was dangerous, each takeoff terrifying. The glider would be hooked to the tow line. The C-47 would snatch it into the air. The glider would be towed for hours back to Hollandia, then return empty for another trip. Samuels made 9 round trips, 18 landings and takeoffs, each one risking his life and the lives of his passengers. Not a single accident, not a single injury. Every extraction successful. By June 14th, 16 men had been brought out by glider. The remaining soldiers walked out, hiking through mountains to the coast. All survived. The Danny watched the entire operation with amazement. Flying machines landing in their valley, taking people into the sky. They had never seen anything like it. Some of them cried when the Americans left. They had formed friendships, bonds. The rescue team gave them gifts, tools, fabric, items that would be treasured for generations. The Danny helped save lives. Without their cooperation, the rescue would have been impossible. They were heroes, unrecognized by history, but essential to the mission's success. Margaret Hastings spent months recovering in military hospitals. Her burns healed slowly, left permanent scars. She was interviewed by newspapers, became famous. The whack who survived a plane crash and was rescued by glider snatch from a Stone Age valley. She didn't feel like a hero, just grateful to be alive. She was discharged in 1946, returned to civilian life, got married, had children, lived quietly, rarely talked about Shangri-La. The memories were too painful, too surreal. When people asked, she would say she was lucky. That's all. Just lucky. John McCollum never fully recovered from losing his twin brother. Robert had died in the crash, burned alive while John escaped. Survivor's guilt haunted him for years. He continued serving in the military, eventually retired, settled in California. He attended reunions with the other survivors and rescue team members, but he never forgot that his brother hadn't made it out. That randomness and luck determined who lived and who died. He died in 2008, 89 years old, still carrying the weight of Shangri-La. Kenneth Decker recovered from his injuries, returned to duty, finished the war, went home to civilian life. He rarely spoke about the rescue. When asked, he would credit the paratroopers who jumped in to save them, the glider pilot who risked everything, the Donnie who helped. He didn't see himself as special, just someone who survived when others didn't. He lived a long, quiet life, died in the 1990s. His family learned most of the story only after he was gone, found his medals, his citations, the newspaper clippings he had saved but never showed anyone. Lieutenant Walter Herndon became a legend in the 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, the medic who jumped into Shangri-La and saved 3 lives. He received commendations, medals, recognition, but he deflected credit, pointed to his team, to Bulatow, to the engineers who built the airstrip, to Samuels who flew the glider, to everyone except himself. He stayed in the military after the war, served in Korea, retired as a colonel, taught military medicine, trained new generations of medics, passed away in 1997, remembered by thousands of soldiers he had trained and inspired. Captain William Samuels never flew another glider mission as dangerous as Shangri-La. Nothing could match it. 9 round trips into an impossible valley, 18 landings and takeoffs on a 500-foot dirt strip surrounded by mountains. Not a single accident, not a single casualty. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, told reporters he was just doing his job. Anyone would have done the same. But everyone knew that wasn't true. Most pilots would have refused the mission. Samuels volunteered. He survived the war, became a commercial pilot, flew for 30 years, retired. Died in 2003. At his funeral, Margaret Hastings gave the eulogy. She credited him with saving her life, giving her a second chance. She never forgot what he had risked for her. The glider snatch technique was used a few more times after Shangri-La,
but never in combat. Too dangerous, too many variables, too much risk. The success of Operation Shangri-La was considered a miracle. Everything had to go right. Weather, timing, equipment, personnel. One failure and people would have died. But nothing failed. The mission succeeded because exceptional people did exceptional things under impossible circumstances. That's the reality of war. Sometimes courage and skill overcome odds that should be insurmountable. The story faded from public memory, a footnote in World War II history. 3 survivors, 1 glider, an extraction that should have been impossible. The newspapers moved on, veterans came home. Life continued. Shangri-La Valley returned to isolation. The airstrip was reclaimed by jungle. The Danny forgot the strange visitors who had fallen from the sky. Time erased the physical evidence. But the people who were there never forgot. In 2011, a documentary team visited Shangri-La Valley. They found descendants of the Danny who had helped with the rescue, elders who remembered the stories passed down from their grandparents, the flying machines, the injured woman with burned legs, the men who built the long path through the jungle, the gifts left behind. The Danny still treasured items from 1945, fabric, metal tools, proof that the story was real, that their ancestors had helped save American lives. They were proud, honored to have played a role in something extraordinary. The lesson of Operation Shangri-La isn't about technology or tactics. It's about people. Margaret Hastings refused to give up despite injuries that should have killed her. John McCollum kept her and Decker alive when giving up would have been easier. Walter Herndon jumped into hostile territory to help strangers. William Samuels flew a glider into conditions that terrified him. The Danny welcomed outsiders and helped without asking for anything in return. Dozens of soldiers worked in brutal heat to build an airstrip for people they had never met. Everyone involved could have quit, could have said the risk was too high. The mission impossible. They didn't. They did their jobs, pushed through fear and doubt, achieved something that military planners had said couldn't be done. That's the real story. Not the glider snatch, not the crashed plane, not even the survival in a Stone Age valley. The story is about human beings refusing to accept that someone was going to die because rescue was impossible. They made it possible. With hand tools and determination and courage and cooperation between cultures separated by 10,000 years of history, they proved that impossible is just a word, that limits exist only until someone decides to ignore them. If this story moved you, we'd be honored if you'd like this video. Stories like these take days of research to bring to light. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten heroes from World War II. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible story from the greatest generation. We want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell us where you're watching from, your country and city. Many of you served in the military or had fathers and grandfathers who fought in this war. Did you know someone who served in the Pacific Theater? Have you heard similar stories of impossible rescues? Share your memories and thoughts below. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering these stories. The survivors of Shangri-La and the men who rescued them deserved more than a forgotten footnote in history books. They deserved to be remembered as the heroes they were. And we're here to make sure that happens.